Hello and welcome back to the Premier Injuries podcast. Today we are doing our deadline live stream that we like to do every so often. It's a weird one because it is a Friday afternoon. Ben, how are you feeling before this game week 32?
Truth be told, I haven't even looked at my team, so I've got no idea where I am.
It's the usual.
Yeah, but I do like the early deadline, and I do like the fact that Newcastle are playing this evening. So hoping to get game week 32 off to a cracking start. I think it'll be tight. I'm expecting us to edge it by maybe one goal, possibly 1-0, maybe 2-1, with San Maxim getting the winner. There you go. You heard it here first.
Oh, well, that is exciting news for Newcastle fans. And I mean, quite often with the early kickoff, it always leads to disappointment. I'm always reticent to kind of captain somebody in the early kickoff. And maybe, do you think that because it's a Friday early kickoff, it doesn't count as much as maybe a Saturday 12:30 one?
I mean, it's always disappointing. I get where you're coming from with that because, if you blank, if you fall at the first, at the early kickoff, with a Friday, you've got to wait all the way through Saturday, Sunday. But no, I'm hopeful. I think Wolves will come to spoil. The absence of Ruben Neves is big for us. Raul Jimenez missing. Of course, he's serving the second game of his suspension. So, there's maybe opportunities there for Newcastle to exploit. We need to pick up points. I still think one more win will keep us up. It's getting very tight at the bottom. The home crowd, will be full of energy. We'll be backing the boys. So, yeah, look, San Maxim. And like I say, maybe if we do edge it 2-1, I fancy that goal to maybe come from Bruno.
So, as I always remind people, do hit the subscribe button so that you're up to date all through the week. But we're updating you with last minute team news and injury news with all the situations so that you can make any last minute transfers just like Ben and I do. We always leave it till the very, very last minute. And often we just shoot off a little bit early from this to get them in before the deadline hits. But let's start off with that injury news then. Is there any headliners that people really need to be aware of so that they're not caught out?
I'm not sure that they're necessarily headliners, but certainly players who've been under the radar in terms of their injuries this week. We heard from Ralph Ragnick around 1:30, and he confirmed that Rafael Varan has picked up a knock. He's had several injuries since joining the club. This latest setback will keep him out of the game. That's in addition to the likes of Luke Shaw. We know that he had problems with that fracture site back in 2015, aggravated it while playing for the national team. He's been to see a specialist and he has been scheduled for surgery on Saturday to remove a couple of screws from the leg. So we know that those two players are out, and also Scott McTominay. Now, while those players may not feature heavily within your fantasy team, it could potentially, change that maybe set up from Ralph Ragnick or bring other players into consideration. Victor Lindelof is probably get the nod ahead of Eric Bailly, but also in my sort of pre-match predicted lineups, I had Pogba playing in a more advanced role, and I actually had Marcus Rashford and Elanga both out of that start 11. But of course, given the absence of McTominay, I've now dropped Pogba back in there alongside Fred. So that brings probably Elanga. I mean, Marcus Rashford has fell way down the pecking order there. For Chelsea as well, I know we have talked about Chelsea this week with regards to bouncing back. Of course, they've conceded 7 goals in their last 2 games at Stamford Bridge. So maybe a game at St. Mary's comes as a little bit of a blessing. And that's been enough, I was supposed to have put a lot of FPL managers off their assets. But, you've looked at the data and, I concur that maybe we're just going to write off that Brentford result in particular as a bit of a blip. But the Blues have been hit with a little bit of a setback for Romelu Lukaku. That's an Achilles issue. And there's also a few other knocks and niggles from that Champions League defeat to Real Madrid midweek.
And with the Reece James situation, a lot of people were disappointed that he didn't start last week. And then when he came on, he got 0 points because 2 goals were conceded. Can you see him seeing out the 90 minutes? Because that's one of the big problems that people have.
I mean, in the predicted lineup last week, I actually didn't have Reece James as starting, so that didn't really come as any major surprise. We know that he was coming off the back of another muscle injury, and given his hampered season, it was always going to be a risk. However, I'm almost of the opinion now that we're in last chance saloon for Thomas Tuchel in terms of, you can't afford too many more slip-ups if you have serious aspirations of nailing down a top 4 Champions League qualification spot. And therefore, I think, Reece James does start. However, the concerns would be how many minutes we'll actually play in. There's a lot of influencing factors in and around here. And, the Raj Bra book of quotes, the risk and reward. If things are going well down at St. Mary's, you can see 60 or 70 minutes of Thomas Tuchel, protecting Reece James. If it's going to go down to the wire, we know what he brings in terms of that offensive as well as, defensive returns. So offensively, Thomas Tuchel may want to take a chance and leave him on. There are other options in that Chelsea team, that can come in. Aspilicueta could be pushed up with Chabaloa sitting in back. So Thomas Tuchel does have options, and that's always the concern when Reece James is getting back up to full fitness.
Yeah, and this is one of the things. I've got him in my team. I'm a bit concerned, but at the same time, he's got such a high ceiling for performances. He's already in the double digits for attacking outputs this season. Just shows what an attack-minded player is, and he suits the Tuchel system well. So if he does start and he does play against Southampton, one of the things that we've kind of written about historically on the Premier Injuries website, people can go and check that out. It's teams who have something to play for. Chelsea, they're also an elite team, playing against Southampton, who what we defined as don't have anything really to play for now. Realistically, they're safe. They're not going down. Realistically, they're not going to move up the table and kind of vie for a European spot. And so this is the kind of game that I like to target. It's just that concern over Reece James. So do you consider any other Chelsea assets in there? Would you go with Rudiger instead because he's a bit of a safer option?
Exactly that. I mean, Rudiger is the safer options, and while he doesn't offer such a high ceiling, he does offer a little bit of an attacking threat. Maybe not from open play, but certainly from set piece. Loves to get himself forward for corners, but also does enjoy the occasional shot from distance, pot shot, as we've seen against Brentford, and occasionally it does come off. But like I say, those are probably the only two that I like. The Maverick pick, I would suggest, is probably Reece James, on the understanding that minutes may be managed. Whereas, Rudiger is a pretty solid starter in that back line. He's been one of the standout performers all season. And like I say, let's not try to get put off too much by those two results. Real Madrid aside and Karim Benzema, Brentford, yes, that's bad, that's disappointing. But you dust yourself down, you get back on track, and we'll see what Chelsea are made of.
So who's the next team that you want to turn your attention to? And just for people who are listening in, I've put a little poll in the chat box so that we know who your captain is. Do comment as well if you've got a differential captain. I certainly do. Who's going to be your captain this game week, though, Ben?
Jason, I have absolutely zero idea whatsoever. Do you know what? There was part of us thinking I would go San Maxim, because I do think he will get on the score sheet. He was a player that had a bit of a disrupted spell through injury and illness. International break came at a good time. And yes, we weren't great at Tottenham, but the caveat there was we have a bit of an ongoing sort of sickness stroke virus bug going through the camp. And there was a lot of players who weren't 100%. And that did translate, and affect performances on the pitch. Joe Linton was one that was forced off. Miguel Almiron failed to make the squad altogether. So, again, I look to write that one off. So San Maxim, maybe in and around that. Elsewhere, leave it until you're towards the end of the show. I'll keep you in suspense, Jason.
Oh, I love it. I love it. You are just the ever showman, Mr. Dinnery. Yeah, but let's continue with the situation here. Somebody has actually put in the comments that they have captained Lacazette. Now, this is something that we talked about quite a few times. Maybe it's a good time to discuss that fixture. But Lacazette, he doesn't often see out the 90 minutes. And in terms of like your injury knowledge there, Ben, he looks like he lacks the fitness in what I would say is the vital end game stage where most teams do concede a lot of goals. You know, legs are tiring, fatigue, comes in. Psychologically, players turn off, and you want your captain to be there in the last kind of 10 minutes to kind of exploit that.
Just a lack of goals generally with Alexander Lacazette. He's not a player that I go into any particular game week thinking, I never have any confidence that he's going to return. He flatters to deceive. He has been all right in patches. We've seen him really come to the fore when Aubameyang, following that internal disciplinary and Lacazette came in and had the armband, and he really stood up and been counted. And yes, he's shone on occasions, but for me, just lacks that level of consistency. Now, the worry for me with Arsenal at the moment, and maybe the game against Crystal Palace give us a little bit of insight into what we can expect maybe going forward, is, the fact that we're going to be without, the Gunners are going to be without Kieran Tierney and now also Thomas Partey. Now, this is a discussion that we had on a previous podcast, and, the potential sort of ramifications of the absence of those two and how it may change Mikel Arteta's football and philosophy, tactics, formation. And for me, like I say, Arsenal assets or let's sit and watch for now, because I think these next couple of games could be pivotal, and I'm not sure that they're going to be to recover from this. And if you did see the podcast, you will know what my reaction was. But if you didn't, I had Arsenal to miss out of the Champions League. I don't see them getting, the data around Thomas Partey alone. I think Arsenal average around about a smidgen under 2 points per game when he starts. Without him, that drops down significantly to around about 1. If you continue the season on that 1 point trajectory with him, you're going to be finishing it in around 6th or 7th place.
Breaking my heart there, Ben. Let's move it to a couple of questions that we have been sent in on the topic of your marvellous Magpies. John has asked, hi Ben and Jason, chances of Willock playing tonight, please? He's had, is it a knee injury? Am I correct there, Ben? Is there much chance he'll be there?
There's every chance, first and foremost. So it's certainly not serious. It's something that the club and Eddie Howe have been aware of now for the last sort of couple of weeks. And he's been playing on that. And that gives an indication of it's more of a minor issue that needs to be managed. However, there has been a little bit of flare-up in this last week. Now, this is my own personal thoughts. Whereas Willock, I see as a player who could play and could make the matchday squad. I think Eddie Howe and maybe even Newcastle supporters are looking and really dying to find a way to get Bruno Guimaraes into that start 11. This provides that perfect opportunity to bring Bruno in, ease Joe Willock out of that start 11, maybe to the bench and start Bruno. So in my predicted 11, I do have Joe Willock named amongst those substitutes.
Wow, interesting insight. Let's move it to the other 3 o'clock kickoff on Saturday then. It's Watford Leeds. A lot of people are kind of looking this as maybe a high scoring game, maybe for a few differentials, and some are putting punty kind of transfers into Watford assets and Leeds assets as well. But what is the injury situation there, and how do you think that will shape the game, Ben?
Well, the Watford is pretty simple. They've more or less got a fully fit squad. So, we've had Angel Hansina on the podcast many times before, doing a great job down there with his backroom staff and his medical team. And Roy Hodgson came out and full of praise. At this stage of the season, there aren't many teams who can boast that. So, last weekend's result against Liverpool at Anfield, on paper 2-0, it looks fairly easy. The reality was Watford could maybe consider themselves a little bit unlucky. So it wouldn't surprise me if Watford were unchanged. And of course, if that was to happen, we will see, Emmanuel Dennis and Joshua King both named on the bench. For Leeds, the big one that I went with and the punt that I went for was actually starting Calvin Phillips. Now, we know he was slightly behind Liam Cooper in terms of his fitness and his sharpness. Now, we've seen Cooper in that start 11, and I just think it's about time to put Calvin Phillips in there. And of course, if he did, it's going to be a huge lift for Leeds. I mean, Watford need to go out and get a result here. We're almost at the point where they can't afford, like I said with Chelsea, you can't afford any more slip-ups. So this could be a really entertaining game. So Leeds, obviously, without Patrick Bamford, Daniel James will probably go and attack. But I do like Rodrigo as an FPL option. He seems to have thrived under Jess Marsh. He spoke about the Spaniard in high regard, and he's talked about his abilities and his commitment and how dedicated he is to his craft. And I think just with that little bit of love, we're seeing a lot more from Rodrigo than we did ever under Marcelo Bielsa.
Yeah, it's an interesting tie. It's one of those bottom of the table 6-pointers, and we shall see if it lives up to the billing of a high-scoring and fascinating game, because we know that Roy loves to build from the back. He's a very good defensive coach, and Watford will be at home as well, so it'll be an interesting one. And just kind of a question with the Calvin Phillips situation. He was it 17 minutes he played in the last game, and I guess there's been no kind of fallback from that. That's the kind of almost litmus test, isn't it, that a player is going to play a little bit more as they play, and there's no kind of discussion of injury or swelling or pain or any sorts of kind of comeback from that.
Yeah, came through that game without any reaction, but by his own admission, he done very little towards in the game. And if we were talking ideal scenarios, then yeah, probably this game comes too soon for Calvin Phillips. But this isn't ideal. We're talking about a highly time-crunched environment, bottom of the table clash, a game that Leeds will not want to lose. And, for those big games and those big moments, you need your big players and you need your best players. And of course, Calvin Phillips is one of those. So as opposed to maybe, coming off the bench and doing a 20 to 30 minutes, I've opted for, the other way. Let's get him out there for 50, 60, 65 minutes. Hopefully he can get the job done, come off protected. We'll bring somebody else in, job done. Jess Marsh, keeps Leeds up.
Let's move it to the 5:30 kickoff, the Villa Spurs game. Is there any kind of information there that we need to be aware of? Because I think, as I've kind of put in the captaincy question there to everybody, Kane seems to be the captaincy choice this game week.
Yeah, and I'm a Kane owner as well, so of course he is a big consideration. But I'll start with the home team first. There have been several question marks this week with regards to player availability. Lucas Denier withdrawn last weekend for the second consecutive game. Fortunately, that was not injury related. That was more to do with a stomach problem. So he's absolutely fine and he's been cleared. Tyrone Mings and Emi Buendia both picked up knocks in the West Midlands derby. Tyrone Mings trained on Thursday, whereas Brentia has trained today. So as long as there's no reaction there, he should be absolutely fine. Danny Ings missed out following the birth of his child, so he comes back into contention. I've actually got him starting as well alongside Ollie Watkins. So, in Marvelous Nakamba, he's played a handful of minutes for the under-23s, but Steven Gerrard did confirm that he will be included in the matchday squad. Again, he's got a long way to go in terms of his fitness, but just the fact that he's in and around that squad will be a major lift. For Tottenham, I only see one consideration or one question mark with regards to the team selection. Of course, they trounced our lot 5-1 last weekend, and that was without the Spaniard, Sergio Reguilon. He pulled up with a late knee problem in training on the Friday and couldn't recover in time. Now, that handed Emerson Royale a start with Matt Doherty switching flanks. And now, I know Conte isn't necessarily a big fan of Emerson Royale, but he did score, put in an okay performance. So it remains to be seen whether he does stick with that same 11 or Reguilon comes in for Emerson with Matt Doherty switching back onto the right-hand side.
Be an interesting call with that, but I think a lot of people are kind of got the Tottenham treble up, or the investment there is Son, Doherty and Kane. So I don't know if many people are still invested in Reguilon. Continuing with the matches there, Sunday, Brentford West Ham. Any information that we need to be privy to, Ben?
I can't see Brentford, in all honesty, after arguably certainly the result for them of the season, maybe even, and certainly in recent history. So I think Thomas Frank will be, I fully expect him to name an unchanged team. And almost forgot there, West Ham. And West Ham, the difficulty is, we heard from David Moyes this morning, that was barely sort of 12 to 13 hours after their performance in the Europa League. So players hadn't been fully assessed. There are sort of one or two concerns. The biggest one for me would be, Jared Bowen. We know he's just come back after a month out, scored last weekend, scored again on Thursday night. This is quick turnaround. And what David Moyes alluded to, he says, look, the Europa League games, they were great in the early rounds because you could effectively play two teams. You would play your fringe players, maybe a couple of under-23s on the Thursday, and then on the Sunday, you go back to your strongest team. However, as you reach the latter stages of the tournament, if you want to progress or you want to, at least compete, you have to go strong. And that was, that was reflected in his squad on Thursday night. Just one change, and that was Areola for Fabianski. So, that's the worry. Now, they're not blessed with a massive squad with any sort of great depth. The right-hand side, there's a possibility you've got Ben Johnson and Ryan Fredericks. Vladimir Sufal isn't quite up to it after surgery on his hernia. You may have one or two places attacking Manuel Lanzini, but again, he had a car accident, isn't 100%. So there are questions there to be asked. Can David Moyes afford to change too many players? I'm not sure. If you go back to the Mikel Antonio, he's a player that you're constantly wary of and worried that he might break down. But as it currently stands, I don't think David Moyes has much of an option other than to start these guys.
It's an interesting situation there, and maybe because of that, Brentford might be in with causing a shock once again because their players are a bit more rested. They're certainly in very good form as well. Eriksen playing, amazing football once again and back to his world-class levels. One of the other 2 o'clock kickoffs on that Sunday is Leicester versus Crystal Palace. Obviously, Palace will be flying high after the demolition of Arsenal and back-to-back clean sheets. I think it's actually 3 in a row now, but back-to-back clean sheets against some of the top teams in England. I mean, it's going to be a tough game, isn't it, for the Foxes?
Absolutely. And I've had a lot of questions on my timeline talking about, should I bring Kasper Schmeichel in? I think people are getting drawn in with a little bit of false sense of security here because they've looked at the performances at the back with Johnny Evans and with Wesley Fofana and thinking, the Foxes are back. They've got that little bit of defensive solidity. And therefore, it makes those options more attractive. However, what I would suggest is both of those players are coming off the back of long-term injuries. And it could be that Brendan Rodgers is now starting to maybe target or focus on, the Europa Conference League as opposed to the Premier League. They're in one of those, they're not going down. They're not really pushing for anything else. So they're safe. Let's go and get some silverware. And he's already alluded to the fact that he will make changes. So, that's the likes of Timothy Castagna, the 2 players that I've mentioned, James Justin, Ricardo Pereira, all players flagged as, potential rotation risks. Now, when you start taking those players out, and then you're starting to maybe bring in the likes of Soyuncu, who has been below par for most of the season, Daniel Amati, who isn't maybe a natural centre-back, or maybe even Vestergaard, you start to see some significant weaknesses in that Leicester team. And for me, along with Arsenal for now, they're a team maybe just to sort of watch for the next game or two and certainly avoid it. I'm not stuck on any of their assets whatsoever.
Yeah, I really don't understand this new kind of Leicester love-in because all through the season they've been, frankly appalling in defence. They've only had 5 clean sheets, but they have the 4th worst XG conceded of all teams. I mean, it's basically relegation level defence. And I think people are almost glazing over the fact that this isn't just this season. they were really bad from the second half of last season as well. So it could be down to injury problems, like we said. Through this season, they've had quite a few key players out. But the fact is, they won the FA Cup last season, and I don't know if that distracted them from the league, but they've just been really poor for a long, long time. And so I think, investing in the likes of Schmeichel's frankly a waste. And you can turn the attention to the last 6 games, but again, they're still bottom 5 for XG conceded, only 2 clean sheets. They've done a little bit better with 6 goals conceded in those 6 matches, but that's basically 1 goal conceded per game again. It's not the kind of stuff that you want to be looking at, and like you said, there's so many concerns over them. Let's move it to the Norwich Burnley match. I think the interesting thing was a lot of people had invested in Wout Weghorst. They thought he was going to, turn up. He had a double game week, and then it was actually Maxwell Cornet who was the best Burnley asset to have. What do you think going into this Norwich game? I mean, this is another classic 6-pointer, bottom of the table. If Burnley can pick up 3 points here, it could put Everton into the drop zone or nearly into it.
Yeah, this is a huge game. And of course, Burnley will be full of confidence edging that 5-goal thriller against Everton, particularly in the manner that they've done it. Maxwell Cornet is probably the only asset that does appeal. But again, we're talking about a player who has had his own injury problems this season, particularly soft tissue, hamstring. He's still getting up to speed with the Premier League. And, Sean Dyche has managed him fairly sort of carefully. He's been picking and choosing when he's been playing and his minutes. But we'll come to the point where you need points on the board and you need your best players to perform. And certainly Maxwell Cornet is that. I've been burnt a couple of times by Cornet. I've had him in my team twice. And I think it's coincided with either picking up injuries or minutes being managed. And I've never actually happened to get a return from him. In one moment of madness, it could have been Jack Daniels induced. I did switch over to Dwight McNeil, who is the most appalling FPL decision I think I've ever made in my whole life. He is going out of my team this week, by the way.
Is he on the infamous Dinnery list of just hateful words that we can't say on this live broadcast?
He's on the slippery slope. He's off. He's off it. He's gone. He's dead to me.
I mean, this list includes elite individuals like Paul Pogba as well. Just to remind
Luke Shaw.
Luke Shaw is on there as well. I guess the final question. Actually, let's quickly visit the comments before we get into this, and just to remind people, do have your final comments, your final questions, because we're nearing the end of the program here today. So, first of all, somebody has asked the prediction for today's game. You've already given it as a 1-0. I'm going to agree with you, Ben. I think that it's going to be 1-0 to Newcastle. I don't really like Wolves. I don't think they're a very good team. I think that they've got problems, and they've kind of really got lucky through this season, and maybe they'll be caught out because they're probably a team with not much to play for now. Like you said, they've lost Ruben Neves as well. It's going to be interesting to see how they cope. A couple of people have put their captaincy choices in. Somebody has said Havertz. Somebody said Bruno. Somebody has mentioned my captain, but we're going to leave that till the end of the show when you make your grand reveal. I'll do it as well. And I guess one question that somebody has had, Diego Martinez has said Iheanacho or Daka. I mean, is that a really difficult one for you, Ben? You're somebody, you love the differential, but you also go for players that are definitely going to start and have those minutes. Is that one that's probably a bit too much for you, adding to the fact that, Leicester have not been in very good form?
Yeah, I mean, the form is a consideration. European fixture is another. We know that Jamie Vardy, he's scheduled to have another, I think his final injection into his knee next Tuesday. So the club will see how he reacts to that. It sounds as if he isn't close to a return at the moment. So therefore, Brendan Rodgers needs to make sure that he's keeping those two players, one, fit and healthy, but secondly, sharp. So if, worst case scenario, somebody else picks up an injury, then that other player can come in and they can hit the ground running. And that's why I see Brendan Rodgers flip-flopping between the two. Kelechi has had the nod in recent years, but it wouldn't surprise me if Daka started this weekend and then back to any Nacho in Europe. So, yeah, look, everything to me, I'm moving away from Leicester. I was sniffing around James Maddison for a little bit. I did like him, but the fact that this European football, and there could be 4, 5, 6 changes maybe this weekend, that's just enough to have me as a no to any of their assets.
So we're building up into the final game of the game week, but just before we do that, captaincy choices. 55% of people tuning in today have gone with Kane. 31% have gone with Son, and so that really does mean that anybody else is differential. But let's talk about that big game. What is the injury news there? Is there going to be anything that changes the face of this match, or is this going to be one of those games where there's no excuses and both teams are going to be going in pretty strong?
Yeah, both teams are really pretty strong. We did hear from, Jurgen Klopp didn't have a great deal to say with regards to, team availability on Friday. He was fairly dismissive. I've checked my sport forward. As far as I'm concerned, everybody's available. However, ahead of the Champions League tie with Benfica, he did talk about how he would manage players' minutes, their load. Liverpool are still fighting on 3 fronts. So, they've got a lot of strength and depth within that squad. And the only sort of concern or worry maybe for FPL managers, I still see people have been attracted towards Diego Jota. Great, like him a lot. But you've got Diaz there now as well. They're doing equally great jobs. We've seen Roberto Firmino in that starting 11 last week. Mo Salah, there's 1 or 2 people starting to move away from Mo Salah. 1 goal in his last 9 all competitions, I understand, and that came from a penalty spot. I hadn't checked that stat myself, but it's a big win. I moved from Mo Salah prior to AFCON and I never went back. And so far that gamble has paid off. But we know, one of the world's best players, maybe not on current form, but, over the course of the season, then certainly, he's liable to, leave him out your team at your peril, because it could come back to bite you on the backside. He's a man for the big occasion and he could deliver against Manchester City. You wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, this is the thing. Salah is the 3rd most transferred out player this game week, 163,000. And you'd assume that was because he's injured or some sort of reason, but it's because of this so-called bad form. But, this is Mo Salah. This is one of, if not the best player in the world at the moment. I don't think people should be moving off at all from him. It's a huge risk. And the City game, it's flagged as the most difficult game of the season, but he can turn up. And these are the games that surprisingly actually have quite a lot of goals in. I don't know if you can call it a derby or a rivalry or whatever, but quite often with these big matches at the top of the table, they're kind of 0-0s or 1-0s, but we've not had a 0-0 since 2018 in that fixture. And so I think there will be goals, and if there are goals, Salah is normally the one involved. He's on the penalties. So if there is a mistake in the box, he will be taking it from the spot. But if not, from open play, he's such a threat as well. And looking at those games going into the end of the season, do you really want him missing out on Man United at home, Everton at home? I mean, that is a huge fixture and a really exciting one. Just throwing it in with a few others there. But I think we've covered all the injury news there then, Ben. You need to get off to do your team. I need to get off and do my team as well. So, yeah, thanks for everybody for tuning in. As always, make sure to subscribe to the channel. We've got so much good content here. Comment, or send messages, tweet us, DM us through the week if you've got any questions. If you see on Ben's Twitter, actually, one of the pinned comments this week was somebody just asking about Everton's injury record. So we do listen, we do look out for you. But for now,